Hey, so hi Josh.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me today. Would you kindly introduce yourselves for anyone who doesn't know who you are?
My name is Josh, and I am the CEO and one of the founders of an organization called 6 Seconds. And we are working to support all people to practice and grow emotional intelligence.
Great. Of course, I'm going to ask you some things that I do know the answer to, but just for the sake of our listeners or viewers. Could you tell us a bit more about 6 Seconds, firstly? So, what was your journey that led you to founding it?
Well, in 1992, I started teaching in a school where we had a program called Self Science. And Karen McCown started that program in the early 1970s. In 1978, it was published as a curriculum. In 1992, Dan Goleman came and visited the school, and he was working on researching what led to his book, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. And he wrote about self-science in that book as one of the models of how you develop emotional intelligence. And so we started to get a lot of inquiries about it. And the maybe useful, more real story that I don't usually tell is in 1997, we had an intensely difficult year. Um, there was an article in one of the newspapers called A Private War. And it was, the reporter talked about how they'd always imagined it'd be so interesting to be a war correspondent. And then getting in the middle of this conflict within this private school and the way people were talking about each other and treating each other. And it was intensely painful and intensely difficult. And uh, without getting into the details of it, it was heartbreaking. And in that place of heartbreak, one of our questions was, what did we not do? What could we have done differently? But also, um, what can we preserve from this? And this was a school where we had thousands of visitors a year, and people would come and they'd say, "I wish I could go here. This is like my dream place to be." And there was um, I mean, we felt like there was this magic that was being shattered, and this place we all cared so deeply about. So in a way, I think it's very much like where we are in the world right now. And when the things you plan, you can't do the way you planned them. And the world comes along and says, nope, that's not going to happen that way. So, I mean, I share it now because it was one of the absolutely most painful experiences in my life and in our co-founders' lives. And from that struggle and that grief, we decided we needed to do something. And we created 6 Seconds as a kind of desperate way to hold on to hope. And 23 years later, we're working in 200 countries. And with people like you who are joining us and saying, this is what I want to do in the world, is to bring more emotional intelligence to the world. And in some ways, here we are again, and we never planned in all of our scenarios and budgeting and thinking, we never planned that suddenly our income in 10 global regions would come to a crashing halt. And I think, like so many organizations right now, businesses and nonprofits and governments and solopreneurs, and I think so many of us are in this place right now of heartbreak and grief and struggle and worry and optimism at the same time, and saying we have to figure out what's really important and hold on to it and share it and bring what are we really going to bring into the future.
Thank you for sharing that, and just hearing the heartfelt sentiment from you. It's the same as when I came to the conference in Newcastle, the Emotional Intelligence Conference. And when I hear you speak, I'm like, yeah, this is why I was drawn to 6 seconds. Like I can feel the pure passion and intention behind it. Yeah, because I didn't know that emotional intelligence was what I wanted to focus on either, but I
Mm.
was looking for coaching training. And, there was something in 6 seconds that drew me in. It's that, I guess, integrity and sincerity. Yeah. So, yeah, tell us then, what is emotional intelligence? And big question, why is it so important?
Well, I mean, we could get into a fairly complex answer, but I think the simple answer is it's just being smarter with our feelings. And I think today, maybe more than ever in my life, people are getting that we all have feelings and they're affecting us, and we don't have to pay attention to them and we don't have to listen to them, but they're there and they're affecting everything. And so we can be stupid with them and just kind of let them come out as they come out. Um, and I think a lot of us are doing that. And we're seeing the way that emotions are driving decisions in very destructive ways in the world right now. Um, from huge geopolitical choices to fighting over toilet paper in American grocery stores, um, to the way we're talking to each other and to our kids, and being stuck alone or with people that we're learning how to communicate and get along with in different ways. And I think it's so vivid right now that emotions are part of everything. And of course, it's always been true, and neurologically it's true, and it's just the way our brains work. But I think a lot of people are seeing that right now. So we can be idiotic with those feelings and just kind of let them affect us however they affect us, and um, not plan for that. Or we can understand that emotions are a form of data, and just like mathematical data or linguistic data, we can become more accurate in picking up that data. We can become more careful in the way we utilize that data to motivate ourselves and each other, to connect, to solve problems. And my view is that the purpose of emotion is to help us pay attention to what's important to us. We have emotions to signal our attention and to motivate us. And emotions tell us there's a risk here, there's an opportunity here. It's why we have them. And they help us connect and communicate with each other about those risks and opportunities. And the more important that we perceive something is, the bigger the feelings we're going to have. So if it's something that's like mildly annoying, and somebody might say, oh, I'm just a little bit vexed about that. You say to them, well, is it important? And they'll say, not really. I'll just let it go, right? But if you have somebody who's enraged or grieving or horrified or just deeply disgusted about something, and you say, well, is this important? They'll say, of course it's important, right? That's why I'm so X. That's why I'm so joyful. That's why I'm so sad. Like, the significance of what we perceive is measured by the emotional intensity. And so, in other words, emotions are a signal about what matters. And if we can get that data and we can use it carefully, then we get to create more of what's actually important in our lives, inside ourselves, with each other, and in our work and in our world.
So I know obviously right now what 6 seconds has been doing is very limited by the lockdown, but yeah, could you tell us about some of the work that's been happening across the world in the last few years with 6 seconds? And then maybe you can tell us what you've been doing now, because I joined the climate of emotions conference the other day, which was wonderful. So yeah, maybe you can say a bit more about the work.
Well, I mentioned that we want to support all people. And for us, it would be a lot easier from a business perspective to say, let's pick one sector or a few countries. But we're a nonprofit, and our goal isn't really to dominate a market. Our goal is to change the context of the way we treat one another and ourselves. And so that to change the context and to work at a systemic level, I think requires us to take this broader, slower, more complex, messy, and somewhat from a business-wise, crazy approach to say, no, we want to work with everyone. So we have a whole team of people who work doing certification training in several key areas: coaching that you mentioned, facilitating, consulting, and education. And we train people how to use these tools and methods. And some of those people work in senior corporate level in companies. Some people work in government. Some people work with prisons. Some people work with churches, synagogues, mosques. Some people work in the kind of personal wellness area. Some people work with parents. Some people work in education and in higher education. So as a community, we have people who are specializing in taking these tools and methods of emotional intelligence everywhere. And then we do a lot of research. We published the world's largest study on emotional intelligence, and we've been doing that for about 10 years. We do a lot of case studies to try to help people understand what works in different spaces. And we've been lucky enough to get some very interesting organizations to let us publish cases about the work that our network members have done with them. So then in addition to that, we essentially use the funds from our corporate work to help support community work. And so, for example, we're partners with UNICEF World Children's Day, and we support the largest emotional intelligence project in the world, which is a free awareness raising program with playful, creative learning that reached 1.7 million kids last year. And this year, I don't know what's going to happen. But what we've done in the last couple of months is we've always, for over a decade, we've done virtual courses. But over the last month, we've done a lot more virtual courses. We've started a kind of online university for everyone to learn about emotional intelligence with free and low-cost classes. We have volunteers from around the world helping to teach those. We have done a couple of online conferences, and the most recent conference we did this week was about climate of emotions and looking at how climate change has a huge emotional amount of suffering and pain that people are experiencing, particularly younger people. And yet that very pain is a signal about what's important. And so we don't want to get rid of that anxiety and that grief, just like we don't want to get rid of anxiety and grief about someone we love suffering. We want to grow the capability to sit in that and say yes and. Right? Yes, this is painful, and what's next? And I think for all of us in this moment with the pandemic, that's where we need to be. Is yes, this, we don't need to bright side this and say, oh, it's not so bad, look at the birds singing. It is bad, it's horrible. There are people suffering. And I think they're going to be quite a long period of time of suffering and struggle as a result of this. And we are in a tremendous time of possibility and clarifying and finding out some very important lessons about who we want to be individually and collectively.
Yeah, so much really important stuff you say here, because I feel so often people want to push away the uncomfortable, unpleasant feelings, right? They don't want to look at grief and anxiety. And I've seen so many people.
I don't, they hurt.
I guess we don't want to, right? Yeah, it's not.
And Gwyneth, I think part of it is like, honestly, if you sit here and open your heart to the amount of suffering that there is in the world, it becomes hard to breathe, right?
Yeah.
You know, and I know you're very passionate about the climate change, and I don't know, I'm sure you've had some of these experiences. Earlier this year, my family and I were in New Zealand, and we were standing in a spot where there was a glacier when I was born, and there's nothing but dry, dead rock there now. And the distance between where I was standing, where I was born, and where the glacier is was a kilometer or more. You know, and that, like, confronting that and thinking about, you know, we're talking about 1,000,000 years of loss that's happened in part of my lifetime. You know, and to sit with that, I was like, I could put my toe in that water of that feeling, but I could just feel, I could feel the, like, I could feel the tsunami of it, or the, I don't know what the metaphor is, but I could feel the glacier of it, the glacial vastness of it. And I couldn't encompass that in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I could touch it. And by touching it, it inspired me.
Yeah. It makes me think of, do you know Joanna Macy? The work that reconnects. Oh, you would love it.
Yes.
You know, yeah. I mean, I've been working a lot with the work that reconnects recently, and I'm training as a facilitator of it as well. But yeah, it just made me think of her quote. You know, she says, "The heart that can break open can contain the entire universe." And part of the spiral of the work that reconnects is honoring our pain to the world, you know. But they always start with gratitude first as a grounding before we go into the pain. And then comes, you know, seeing with new eyes and then going forth. So it's really powerful for activists, I think, especially environmental activists, as a way of, yeah, you know, really going deep into those feelings, not just kind of going, oh yeah, it's sad, as you know, a lot of people, right, don't really want to.
Well, if these messages, these feelings, if you think about it as a message from you to you, right? And if it's a big feeling, it's about something important. So here you are in this moment, you know, looking at this glacier that was, or looking at this forest that was, or looking at this parking lot that is. If you let yourself feel it at least a little, you are getting a message from you to you about what's important. And it might be a message that's very hard to hear. But my experience is, and this is for me the big paradoxical, I don't know, wonderment. I don't know how to describe it, but when I trust myself and allow myself and maybe love myself enough to do that, something is catalyzed for me. And I feel, and I can feel it right now, I feel this energy inside me, and this determination grows. And I feel like that's the kind of the teeter-totter point where we, if we go too deeply into the emotion and we get lost in our anxiety and our grief, and we're drowning in it, it doesn't work. And then on the other side, if we pretend it's not there, it doesn't work. But if we can, some people have described it as surfing the wave.
There's a lot of water-related metaphors when it comes to EQ, right?
Well, actually, I have an observation about that. My uncle, one of my uncles is a doctor, and he and I were talking about this, and he said, you know, it's interesting. If we look at all of our bodily systems, our breathing, our blood, our digestion, our endocrine system, our lymph system, all of these systems, if they're not in a state of flow, we have a problem. And maybe the same thing is true with our emotions.
So what's blocking the flow now? I was going to ask you about that state of the heart report, right? Showing that EQ seems to be on the decline. So what do you think is causing that?
So an easy answer would be, social media is the devil and that's the problem. I don't think that's the answer. I see social media as a magnifier, much like coronavirus. Well, COVID-19 is a magnifier. We have a number of rifts that are being exposed by this pandemic. We have a number of rifts that are exposed by social media. There's, I think, some underlying unraveling of humanness that's gone on for a long time. I don't think this is new. I think there's a kind of viral in the sense of a coronavirus form of capitalism that we've allowed to dominate our world, a highly extractive, short-sighted form of capitalism. My older child has become rather vehemently anti-capitalist, and I'm not there. I don't understand what the alternative is exactly. They see it more clearly than I do, but I do see that that's this extractive economy, and then the extractive attention economy of the way our social media algorithms are literally designed to addict us. And then the sense of like who we are becomes measured by the number of likes we get. But that's not the problem, that's the symptom. And I know for some people they'd say, oh, well, we've lost religion. I don't think that's the answer. We've lost trust in government. I don't think that's the problem. I think that's the symptom. I think there's a constellation of factors that have come together. And I don't know when it started, but I see that this constellation of factors through an emotional lens, what I see is profound disconnection from ourselves and each other.
And nature.
And nature. Yeah. And we are nature. And so when we become disconnected from ourselves, we become disconnected from nature. We become disconnected from this voice of telling us what really matters in our lives. And in that the whole range of things that's fueling that disconnectedness, it leaves a space for a certain kind of politician to step in and a certain kind of sales process to step in, which says, you're not good enough, you're not enough, you can't solve these problems, only I can do this. They're the enemy, we need to fight against them. Buy my product, you'll feel better. And it's like this noise makes it harder and harder and harder for us to hear ourselves and each other.
Yeah.
So
no, I don't know about you, but this whole lockdown has kind of changed how I felt about the digital age and social media, right? Because it was easy to kind of scapegoat that, and now we're connecting more than ever before over Zoom.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I saw an article this morning about the kind of sexual revolution happening among Generation Z with the lockdown and digital communication, and it is going to change a lot of things in our life.
Yeah, wow. I'm curious what is happening.
Well, I think maybe I should share the article with you, but it seems like there's a lot of virtual sexual behavior happening as people are very lonely.
Well,
A lot
less
of nude, a
risk of
lot of nude,
STDs, I guess.
yeah. Well, a lot of nude pictures are being posted apparently.
I was wondering what happens to Tinder at a time like this. Maybe people would have to actually speak to each other again, but maybe not.
Well, I
Oh,
think that is a very interesting question to me. Is this going to catalyze us toward a deeper level of connectedness or a deeper level of disconnectedness? And I can feel for myself, I go in the grocery store and it's like nobody looks at each other in the eyes. It's like, oh, that person's dangerous, that person's dangerous. And it feels, I don't know how it is there, but for me, it feels kind of like a risk to go out of the house right now. And so, what do we internalize from that? Either we internalize, I really want to go be able to see people and hug people again and just not have that, or we internalize the world is actually dangerous and people are dangerous and
yeah.
the other is dangerous.
Yeah, I feel it here for sure. That was the first thing I noticed, was that people were suddenly avoiding eye contact, right? Like they are afraid they're going to catch COVID through looking you in the eye. And
Mm.
yeah, it does make the outside world feel, yeah, unwelcoming. And then,
So the neurology of that, of course, is that as we become more stressed, we move more into patterns of protection. And one of the things that fear and anxiety do is they fuel our defensive stress reaction, which our brain then pushes us to more short-term thinking, a smaller sphere of concern. Let me protect what's mine. Let me protect this small bubble. And I think there's a tremendous risk, about environmentalism, about social progress in general, that we will move into an even more reactive state that we were in. And I think that would be a very bad outcome.
yeah, that's the fear, right? Because when we're in fight or flight mode, we think in more black and white terms, right? Like good and bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I don't win, I die. And so, I'm going to fight, or I'm going
Mm.
to shelter in my house and build bigger walls.
Yeah, yeah. And then I do wonder, are we in an echo chamber, right? Because my Facebook news feed tells me, oh, everyone's using this time to grow and explore themselves and heal ancestral trauma. But I don't know what my neighbors are doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I live in an area where the houses are fairly far apart and we're able to go outside and walk. And yesterday I was walking on our little road here and I just guess it was the time of day that I was walking. I saw, kind of three of the neighbors driving by. And I was very heartened to be cheerily greeted with waves and, rolling down the window and good to see you. Um, and I find that, at that online conference, I find that people genuinely want a more authentic and meaningful connection.
So the question is, how can emotional intelligence help as well with, because you mentioned the connection to ourselves, right? Like trusting ourselves. And yeah, what about connecting to each other?
Well, we did some interesting research last year about what happens when people practice emotional intelligence. And it does seem that connecting with self and accepting of ourselves and being able to be more honest and authentic with ourselves seems to be integral to having a more authentic connection with each other. And I think what happens is when we're in that sort of surface uh, mode, look at me on social media, am I okay mode, we're in a lot of self-judgment. And we've literally taken our validity and put it out there for somebody else. And when we can move into a place where we aren't chasing that external validation and it's almost cliche to say that we love ourselves, but if we can at least say, yeah, okay, I can see myself, I see where I am, it is what it is, and maybe it's not ideal, but it is what it is. um, and I'm not in this kind of, anyway, when we can move into that state, I think we then are less judgmental about others and less kind of caught up in that surface lens. So I would say, like, a fascinating starting point is just, well, what if all of your emotions, even the painful kind of shitty ones, are useful to you? And what if you're not broken? you know what if your jealousy and grief and loneliness and silliness and joy and playfulness, what if those are all just fine? And what if there's this profound wisdom in you that's come through thousands of years of gifts from the world in the past, and you've learned some things that are totally wrong and stupid, and you've learned some things that are brilliant and uh, beyond belief. And what if all that is there, and what we get to do is be in this journey of discovery, right? And emotions are there as guides and teachers for us. It seems like a worthwhile project for a quarantine.
It does, it does. Yeah, I know. I love to imagine people are spending the quarantine, working internally on self-love. Sadly, I don't know if it's happening that much. But I don't know, what do you feel? Because I guess we are in some sort of bubble, right? Or echo chamber, but I think you're probably doing a lot more work out there with different communities. So what do you see happening at the moment?
Well, I mentioned my older child is in New Zealand right now, and the term they use is for the shelter in place is your bubble. You have your bubble, and don't let your bubble join another bubble. And there's something very rich in that metaphor, about how big and transparent are we going to allow our bubbles to be. I don't know. People can be so awful, and at the same time, I find people can be so inspiring, stunning. And we look at, people going out on their balconies and singing to each other, or applauding the healthcare workers. We look at people finding a way to get food to each other. And well, one of our regional network directors is from the north of England, and she says they have a saying there, which is "Nout queer and folk." I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. Sorry, Sue. But it's like, we are very strange creatures.
Yeah. There's nothing as weird as humans, is what it means, right? Yeah.
And I mean, there's just so much beauty and ugliness in the human experience. And what I'm seeing is people grappling with that. And I'm seeing in our network, anyway, a tremendous amount of commitment to take care of each other and to support people to find optimism, which does not mean ignoring the problems. Optimism is that both end state. And, in these doctors and nurses and healthcare workers and people cleaning the doorknobs, and people delivering food, and they're doing a vital kind of work. And then there's this other kind of work, which is a work about talking about how we're feeling and saying, yeah, it's hard and that's okay. And that's what I'm encountering literally every day. So that's the world I'm seeing, and I'm very grateful that people like you and so many others are saying, yeah, I'm going to add my voice to that chorus.
Yeah. No, I feel, this is an amazing time, right, where all of the beauty and ugliness are really more apparent than ever before. I guess because
Yeah.
we're slowing down and we're really taking stock and looking at it. And I'm so curious what will come next. I think everyone I speak to is, afraid that we're going to try to rush back into business as usual too quickly,
Yeah.
instead of really using this time to envision the kind of world we actually want to be living in. Yeah. So what?
My guess is it's not going to be one or the other, and it would be, I would love it if we could just say, okay, let's restart in a new way. And I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think,
Yeah.
Some of the old stuff is going to continue and some new stuff is going to emerge.
Yeah, I think I like that you resist the easy answers, right? Because people often want to just have, again, the black and white thinking, oh, it'll all be fixed or it'll all go completely wrong. And yeah, it's always a much more complicated story than that, right? Much
And
more.
that gives our individual agency so much more importance, because at the end of the day, there are going to be, 7.7 or whatever billion stories of what happens after the pandemic.
Yeah.
And, each of us is going to kind of add to some of those stories. So what if we individually just say, you know what, I'm going to step up in a new way.
So what's your mission or 6 seconds mission? Maybe they're the same.
Well, my own mission is about increasing what I would call compassionate wisdom. And it's really what we've been talking about. It's this um, sense of figuring out what matters and using our connection with self and each other and the larger world to guide us. And it's not something that it's not how I grew up. It's not what was normal to me before I started doing this work. And it's not easy for me now. It's easy right now in this conversation with you, but in the day to day. So that's who I want to be in the world, is somebody who is inspiring compassionate wisdom. And for me to do that, there's a lot of growing for me to do. And that's very related to 6 Seconds work. And really what we're committed to is supporting people to grow their own emotional intelligence and to practice their own emotional intelligence in a way that supports and engages others to practice. And that's our strategy, is to support change makers, again, people like you, to say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to become more clear about my own emotions. I'm going to connect with myself more. I'm going to be more intentional. I'm going to be more purposeful. And in so doing, I'm going to make space and invite others to do that.
It's really wonderful for me that almost every conversation I end up having on this podcast comes back to the 3 strands of connection, the self, others, and nature of the earth, which is exactly what I have on my coaching site as well as my focus, yeah, and also self-love. Everything comes back to these things time and time again. And again, it could be my echo chamber, but it just seems so clear. This is where we need
Well,
to work.
we have partners around the world at 6 Seconds who take the methodology and apply it in a new space. And sometimes that's, sales, or sometimes that's leadership or change. We have one partner that their focus is spiritual emotional intelligence. And when we started this process, I was really doubtful about this idea. And as we started working for over a year with them to develop a model and develop the assessment, to figure out, what does that mean in a way that's really something anybody can connect to and talk about. And it's really not connected to a dogma or a practice, but kind of these underlying principles. Where are those? And those were what we came to. And that assessment is about using your emotions to connect with yourself, to connect with others, and to connect with the larger world.
I'll have to
So I
check
think
that out a
I
bit
think it's a
more.
pretty universal
Yeah.
vision.
Oh yeah, I think so. I can sort of feel that come out in so many conversations these days anyway. It's a deep hunger, right? I think to reconnect. Well, I say reconnect. I guess we have this feeling that we lost something and we're going back to it, although I don't know if
Mm.
that is more of a metaphor for rejoining the universal oneness or something. But
So here's my non-scientific view.
yeah.
I think the connection is there, and I think sometimes I can feel it. And when I tune in and I slow down and I'm present and I'm engaged and I can feel it. And sometimes that's in a coaching conversation, sometimes that's in a podcast interview. Sometimes it's sitting and watching the hummingbirds play in the garden, and sometimes it's in a cathedral. I remember being in the just lost it. What's it called in Istanbul? The Hagia Sophia.
Yeah.
And I saw people looking up into the light. And just like the root, there's like all these people just looking up into the light. And I felt it. And I felt it in forest, and I felt it in the middle of Shanghai in training coaches. So I think it's there.
Yeah. Whatever it may be in a scientific explanation, I know what you mean, right? It's that feeling of, connection to something greater or to source. People use a lot of different words for it. Yeah.
When I was in high school, I took a class where we studied the Tao Te Ching, and it really, crystallized something for me that I've thought about my whole life. And my teacher, Barry Branken, shared this metaphor of a balloon. And he said, one way of explaining the Tao is that you think about a balloon is creation, and inside the air is the Tao. And he said, what happens for each of us is we're like a little bit of the balloon that's kind of pinched and twisted, a little bit of the air inside us. And we go, that's my air, and I'm going to protect it, and I'm going to hold on to it. And if we untwist and it goes pop back into the surface of the balloon, our air, it's no longer our air. And so we kind of resist that. And yet, when we do that, all of a sudden, there's all this air that's our air. That metaphor has really just rattled around in my head for quite a lot of years.
Yeah, like it. So, what I want to ask now, because I'm just looking at the time as well. Yeah, what are some little, I don't know, tips we can give people who are wanting to feel more connected and they're at home isolating?
Yeah. Well, so I mentioned this before, and I think this has, for me, been one of the most powerful lessons of emotional intelligence is your feelings are there for a reason. They're not good or bad. There's no such thing as negative feelings, and there's no such thing as positive feelings. Joy isn't better than sorrow. Feeling giddy with excitement is lovely and it's wonderful, and it's not better than feeling alone and jealous and grieving. It's that they're all messages. And for me, when I've been able to embrace that, um, and just say, okay, that's interesting. Another metaphor that I like for that is it's like looking at the clouds going by, and we might say, oh, look, that looks like a butterfly. Oh, I see a dragon. I see a kitty cat, whatever. I see a dude eating an ice cream cone. It's, we're kind of detached from those things that we see in the clouds. And we say, oh, I wonder what can I see? And I think if we can look at our own emotions and our own thoughts and our own actions in the same way and just kind of step back and step out of the movie of our lives and go, oh, that's interesting. What's that person learning? What's that about? What are the possibilities? And I think when we step into that state of curiosity, and I started by talking about self-science, the state of curiosity is the state of being a self-scientist. As a scientist of self. Oh, that's interesting. And let me watch that. Let me see that. Is that trend? And we don't just feel one thing at a time, would be my second key message. We can be scared and excited at the very same time. We can be really mad at somebody and totally in love with them at the very same time. And so as we become more curious, we also notice these multiple layers and richness of our feelings. And then that creates a freedom, right? And then from that freedom, when we can come to that place of freedom, then we can say, well, all right, what's really important? All these messages, there are all these perspectives, there are all these lenses. These masks from Bali are on the wall here. There are different characters from Balinese dance. There are all these characters, and they happen to have different emotional expressions. These characters provide different perspectives, right? And one of them might be more or less right, but it may be that they all are seeing something different and interesting and useful. So then I can say, okay, what really matters now and in the future? Where do I want to be? Where do I want to be looking at this in 5 or 10 years? And that process, that's the 6 seconds model. We call it know yourself, choose yourself, give yourself. And it starts that know yourself is that self-science, that inquiry. And then choose yourself is expanding that space of freedom. And then give yourself is stepping forward on purpose.
Yeah, and the give yourself is one of the things that I really like in the 6 seconds model, right? Because you maybe don't hear that so much in other models of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's where we really move from intelligence to wisdom, right? It's not just get the data, right? And don't just solve the problem, but solve the problem for your greater goal.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah, to have a why. And I always love the term noble goals, that you have pursue noble goals. Yeah, it's refreshing, after so much of, oh yeah, set your goal to make millions of dollars or dominate a market, as you said. But
we don't have to, the smart goals are useful, but we need the bigger goals to guide them.
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, yeah, if people are really honest with themselves about why they're doing something, it might be, to gain that validation that you talked about, right? Yeah. And that's, yeah, maybe not a good reason to try to become a millionaire. If you're doing it because you want to have a non-profit where you help people around the world, though. It's a different game.
Yeah, and I don't, I recognize that for some people, like they have an urgency to make money. That's fine with me. Do it in a way that is meaningful for you and that is sustainable for you and others and the earth.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And yeah, I feel we've brought a lot of really nice wisdom and calmness into this conversation, which I like. Do you want to add anything else for people who are listening?
Annabelle Jensen, the president of 6 Seconds, says we leave emotional traces. In every interaction, we leave emotional traces. And I think that's super clear right now, as so many things are, that we're affecting each other. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't grapple with our struggles, but it does mean we can see the effect that we're having, and we can see it, and we can choose it, and we can give to each other right now, maybe in a way that's greater than we could a month ago.
Yeah. Cool. So thank you again for joining.
Thank you.